Shalom from Jerusalem. My name is Albert Veksler. I'm the director of Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, and we are here in our offices with answers for our allies. With me is a fantastic speaker, great friend, Dr. Nir Boms. You have just come out of a actual war zone. You are major in Reserve's Home Front Command of Gaza Brigade, and you have an amazing academic career. You are the research fellow at Moshe Dayan Center at Tel Aviv University and whatnot. There's a long list of amazing achievements you've done. And we're here today to discuss the international arena that actually led us into this horrible October 7. And I want to hear from you. The Saudi talks, the normalization talks, made many people concerned also because they said, we don't know what's on the negotiations table. What was Saudi Arabia getting from Israel? Why did they want to go into these talks? And you are an expert. You spoke at length about the Abraham Accords at Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast years ago. And I want to hear from you because you know much more than you want to say, actually. But please, as much as you can share, we would be happy to hear.
Well, Albert, we're coming back now to really 5 weeks ago before this horrible Black Saturday. And we've had, in a way, a different Middle East. And it was a Middle East that was not led by the Israeli-Palestinian agenda, but it was really led by the quote-unquote normalization agenda, the deconfliction agenda, with the latest issue on the table, the Saudi. Now, the Saudis were, in some ways, the pioneers in reimagining a new Middle East, and I'm talking to the Saudi peace plan, which is now 20 years old, which was first coined by Thomas Friedman after an interview he had with the Saudi king, and they were not the part of the Abraham Accords per se, although that's also not entirely true because Saudi is really the custodian of Bahrain, and if the Saudis would have insisted that Bahrain is not going to join, Bahrain would not join. The Saudis were the ones who saved Bahrain in 2011 with the Arab Spring, which was really Iranian-led riots. This was the Saudis, and Saudis are the ones who are really the custodians of the king. Bahrain is ruled by a Sunni family. It has a significant majority of Shia population. So it's not an easy scenario there. And even afterwards, we have seen that the relationship, informal relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia continue to develop. We have heard about some secret visits, and then we've had some public visits, and we had planes that were allowed to come in. So de facto, the process of normalization had begun. When this issue became on the table, actually a lot of it was not really Saudi-Israel, although this is the perspective that we've used here. It was really an attempt to bring Saudi back to the helm of Middle East politics. And what the Saudis wanted from Israel was really very much connected to what they wanted from the United States. They had three major demands. They had the first one had to do with military security alliance, creating a structure, an agreement that will guarantee a military pact. And that's really bringing back the relationships with the United States and Saudi Arabia to a stronger cooperation, and also making sure that Saudi is going to be protected when it comes to potential future challenges, particularly coming from the direction of Iran. The second, which was very complicated, was the nuclear issue. Saudi wanted civilian nuclear energy, and any time you mention nuclear in the Middle East, it's a precedent and it's complicated and what exactly this means, and there were advanced conversations about how can that be done so that it's going to ensure that perhaps the enrichment process is not going to be done on Saudi soil, so that it's not going to contribute to a potential nuclear race But of course, that request had something to do with the resources available in Saudi Arabia, with the attempt to move beyond oil energy, but also because the Saudis felt that they cannot stay behind when it comes to what's happening, really across their shores, almost with Iran. And the third part of it, in terms of the Israel normalization, and here they wanted to do something that perhaps was not done under the Abraham Accords, is really create a real breakthrough when it comes to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Now that, again, there were many things that were put on the table, and the reasons why you didn't see it materialize is because the agreement here is not so easy. It's not that we're able to, even if Israel wants to compromise or to offer some additional measures to improve the Palestinian, to change the Palestinian file. It's not that either, again, Hamas before October 7th, we can do a lot in Gaza, and in the PA we don't really have anyone to work with. So part of this was what can be done, perhaps some arrangements regarding Temple Mount, perhaps really a process.
Custodianship of the Temple Mount to the Saudis, is that what you're talking about?
The Saudis, there are different ideas that were put on the table, and I think a lot of them were done in sort of a trial balloons. There was something simple that was discussed, which was to enable Palestinians who wants to perform the Hajj flights directly to Saudi Arabia, including Palestinians from the West Bank, which we now created an arrangements for them to go through the Eilat airport with a secure road, so they will be able to go out of the country, and particularly to Saudi Arabia, particularly for the Hajj, simplifying the process that otherwise was allowed through Jordan, through lots of mediators and corruption, and something that has been very expensive. The issue of custodianship was going back and forth, or some degree of involvement, which is complicated in the context of the Arab politics, because the Jordanians have the custodian ownership, and the Moroccans are involved broadly in the issue of Jerusalem. Saudi is the guardian of Mecca and Medina. Jerusalem is the third. Al-Aqsa is the third holiest site according to Muslim tradition. But all of these ideas were a part of an attempt to see what can potentially happen, either in a symbolic way or otherwise. The Saudis would have probably asked for other potential measures, from settlement freeze all the way to changing some of the designations of area A, B, and C, to giving the Palestinians authority, additional land. Some of that potentially could be acceptable to Israel, pending on the formula. But again, one of the biggest issues is that it's not that you really have anyone to work with significantly in the PA. Abu Mazen barely controls Ramallah. The leadership structure there is fractured, and therefore almost any measure you take, it's not exactly clear who is going to get this and who is going to be able to manage and administer this.
And they want now to run Gaza. I mean, it's what they say.
Well, I think if you're jumping now, and if you ask me how you can create lemonade out of this mess, and it's not that there is a very easy answer for this, but one thing I can say is the following. If I'm talking from an Israeli perspective, Israel, following the war, will need to restart, and we already seen the new version, operation system of Israel's 3.0 being written. 1948 was version 1.0, 1973 was version 2.0, and I'm quite convinced that 2023 will be version 3.0. Israel is not going to be the same. There's going to be a process here of introspection, changing of political leadership. There's going to be a process here that attempts to really rethink everything we have done.
But again, coming back to this Saudi talks, so you think that, again, I know that Saudis have been demanding for the Palestinian state from the beginning. I mean, this has been their plan, they've been demanding it, and was this on the table?
Well, Not really, because the Saudis understood that this is, at this point, is not something feasible. But that's where I was getting it with my last point, is exactly this point. If you want a Palestinian state, the Palestinians now needs to do exactly what we have now been trying to do. We need a Palestinian 2.0 project. And the Palestinian 2.0 project that hopefully the Saudis and others from the Gulf could support is really a restructuring of the entire file. No Oslo, no Palestinian Authority, no Hamas in Gaza, none of this had worked. The only way which I can see that there's going to be a future for this is custodianship that will enter the entire Palestinian territory, certainly Gaza, and creating some sort of a Cambodia model, where somebody holds this, along with coordination, security coordination with Israel for 5 years. If the Saudis would be willing to put down their sleeves and actually work on this, they actually know how to do de-radicalization. They'll probably do a better job than us on eradicating Hamas.
But also Kosovo had a K4 quite successful. I mean, I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable with NATO partners than with Saudi Arabia coming to coordinate something here. Do you?
I'm certainly feeling more comfortable with NATO, and I think the configuration of whoever partner will enter is a complicated file. But I also think that it's about time that the Arabs would take some responsibility for the Palestinian file. Remember that what I mentioned, I think in my previous program, was that there was a famous Egyptian saying that we will fight for the Palestinian cause until the last drop of Palestinian blood. And I think a lot of that has been, in the Arab discourse. We are willing to potentially support, we are happy to give lip service, but we're not willing to actually take action. And I think it's about time to take action. I think it's about time to say, look, if you really the Hamas is a terrorist organization in Saudi Arabia. It's a terrorist organization in Egypt. It's a terrorist organization in the United Arab Emirates. You have to do something against the terrorist organization if you define it as such. It's not enough to say that we potentially condemn it.
And yet United Nations have been unable to condemn Hamas, unable to demand the hostages to be released. It's so strange. I mean, we talk even Vatican. Even they cannot condemn Hamas. I mean, it's something that is so strange, in my opinion.
Well, that's where we really need to have a focusing moment. In Colombia, I just saw pictures from 2 days ago, big demonstration, Columbia University in New York City. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Of course, we are familiar with this chants. But let's just think about this for a second.
What it means.
You want from the river to the sea. Okay. You want these types of Hamas animals and these type of pictures. That's what you call freedom? Is that what you call Palestine? What Palestine you wish to see after you annihilate or deport all the Jewish people from the land of Israel? What is the mindset that people need to understand? And I think we need to understand, if somebody really believes in Palestine, and I actually belong to the people who believe that we need to find a way to coexist here, we need to find a way to recognize each other, and I'm not averse to the word Palestine. There are people who would not use it, but I don't mind. I have Palestinian colleagues and friends. I've hired a Palestinian to manage one part of my program at Tel Aviv University. I believe that this is what we need to do here in the region. We're not able to get people to disappear. We need to recognize them, and of course they need to recognize us. And of course, if now what Hamas did, now they're destined themselves to this war, and that is killing many more Palestinians because of this. But in order to coexist here, what we need is a completely different mindset. And what sometimes almost beyond me, although again I've been enough experience to help explain it, is how can it be that intellectuals in the West don't really understand what is it that they're chanting for? If they want Palestine free, what they need to do is to demonstrate against Hamas. If they want Palestine free and they want to have a Palestinian state, what they need to do is to make sure that a moderate leadership will be able to fit in. And this is perhaps one of the reasons why some of the Saudi file on the table and some of this involvement from our allies is potentially can be positive, because they understand that Hamas is a threat. They do not want Hamas to win, partially because they don't want Iran to win, because they understand the linkage. They understand the linkage of the radical axis, and they would like to see a different reality here in the Middle East.
Now, also, again, these demonstrations you mentioned, many of my friends have been not just worried about hundreds of thousands of people gathered in London or in other capitals of the world, chanting this, what we just mentioned. It brings this truth home in a very painful way. And I can give you examples of little children at school being bullied, over Israel that needs to be erased, or, Muslim gangs in Germany who beat up other kids, and bully them, and so on and so forth. So this brings us to this whole other area. Some reason, with some way, these demonstrations, they did not start when Israeli land incursion started. They started early on, almost like celebrating, quote unquote, Hamas victory. And that's what is my question really. Will the West understand? Will they be even able to deal with this threat that they now have in their very homes?
Well, the West is a big word. We have people who understand more of it, and we have people who understand less of it. I think part of the challenge in many places really is the story that you see based on where it comes from. And often people see only one part of the story. And the story is somewhat complex. We've always suffered from this idea that Israel now that has strong military, the Palestinians that are perceived as the weaker ones, are able to provide all these pictures of Palestinian children and women and standing in front of an Israeli tank. So now with this war, we had some different pictures, because the barbarity that was documented by Hamas's own people, and by the way, some of it was documented by Hamas journalists that are actually also working for the New York Times, AP, and Reuters. And they were the ones with them documenting all of this. So we got perhaps some people awakening and understanding this. But I still think a lot of people don't really understand. And they think that this is about oppression and occupation. And they forgot that particularly in the case of Gaza, Israel withdrew from Gaza in 2005, partially because of a vision, if we're only going to stop the occupation, then Gaza can become Singapore rather than Afghanistan. And Hamas was able to take over. They did this, just remind you, very brutally, going after the PA people who were there, throwing them alive from buildings and killing them, and having a revolution and creating a military regime that still exists today. I don't understand why people and how can people demonstrate for that. I think they simply don't see that part of the story. We need to help them see, we need to help them understand, we need to show them some of the atrocities. And by the way, we need to let them listen to some of the Arab voices that are criticizing Hamas. And of course, they're not, so many of them are afraid to do so, but they have done that. And there's a list of them. A woman like Dalia Ziada from Egypt, who very courageously stood in front of TV cameras and said that Hamas should be cursed, because that's not the way to go about it. Of course, she was attacked right afterwards, like many others, but she's not the only one. And if you listen to the Saudis, who basically say, okay, we're not going to close the normalization file, it's because they understand that we cannot let Hamas win. We cannot let that mindset win. And I hope that in the West, people will understand that if they really care about the future of Palestinians here, and if they really care about the Palestinian state, the only way to get it is not from the river to the sea. The only way to get it is by recognizing the people who live here, by recognizing Israel, by recognizing the right of the Jewish people to have a state of their own. And then we'll be able to also recognize the fact that there are other people living here and they also have rights. But if you want to conquer and fight, what you'll need to get is if you're not putting the hand and you're putting a sword, then you're going to get a sword. That's the only thing that's left to do.
Now, there's been a lot of talks about ceasefire, negotiations, letting some hostages out. Can Israel agree with ceasefire?
There were two objectives that the Prime Minister articulated when it comes to this operation. One that has to do with the elimination of Hamas leadership in Gaza, and the other has to do with the release of hostages. At this point, 239. We've just seen in the past few days evidence that some of the hostages at least that we know of, are alive in Gaza. And that's something that's very important to us. For others in the international community and in the West, it's also important to have a ceasefire from a humanitarian perspective. I think this is partially for the Americans and others. They would like to show that their involvement is also able to create some humanitarian result and relief. And as we've seen in previous rounds, often it is the case that Israel is pushed into a corner in this regard, because Israel would not like to say that it will not allow humanitarian relief. What was done so far is that we've created a mechanism that allows humanitarian aid to enter. We've created zones in Gaza where aid can be given. And we've allowed the Jordanians and others to bring aid inside. We're not against aid. We're against bringing Hamas additional petrol that they will use to continue their military operations. But we're not against bringing humanitarian aid in. And we've created some windows in where this can happen, and where people can leave the northern part of Gaza and move to the south. Of course, Hamas prevents them from doing so as a part of using their human shield tactic, and we have documented that. Every conflict needs to have an end point, and usually before an end point there's also some points of some ceasefire. Israel may need to come to this point, but hopefully without compromising the broad objectives of eliminating the leadership of Hamas. I think we're getting closer to it.
Now, finally, this whole, talk about humanitarian aid and refugees, Israel is not the only country that has a border with Gaza Strip. Egypt has. And this is so often, so conveniently forgotten, that Egypt could, allow them out, allow people in. They could do a lot. Israel is not controlling the Egyptian border. And now recently we heard also that the Jordanian Prime Minister set these red lines of, if any Palestinian would be removed from, quote unquote, their territories, then this would be the red line for Jordania to enter the war. So what do you see here?
First, I don't think that Jordan will enter the war so quickly. It doesn't have the capacity of doing so, or the interest in doing so. But the Jordanians are really struggling with public opinion, which is pro-Palestinian, from the simple fact that over 60%, some say 70% of its populace is of Palestinian descent, and therefore Palestinian politics is very real and personal in Jordan. We have seen this for years, although the ruling family has always taken a more measured position and attempts to lead Jordan in a different direction. They would not like to see another Palestinian type of revolt and uprising. They have seen this in the past, and it was never pretty or beautiful. So I do not suspect that that's going to be the case with Jordan. And with Egypt, of course, they have the Rafah crossing. And to be honest, Egypt has been part of the problem, because how would all these weapons enter Gaza? They did not enter from the Israeli side. Now Israel has been guarding the sea side. So there's been some smuggling, but there's been more smuggling coming from Egypt than there's smuggling coming from any other side. And then Egypt does not want to be a custodian of the Palestinian problem. They would rather Israel would do it. In 1979, when we had the peace agreement with Egypt, Egypt refused to take Gaza back. They owned it. They didn't want it, and I guess they were smarter than us because they realized that they don't want to have this problem on their shoulders. I think at this point, if Egypt would have wanted to take the entire Gaza Strip, I think Israel would not have a hard time saying, you know what, take it, it's yours. And at this point, I think they're going to have other interesting new quote-unquote solutions or thoughts about all of this, because I think if it's up to Israel, they will be very happy that somebody else will take the file. If we will need to take the file, either the Palestinians will find a different way to conduct their politics, and if not, at this point, Israel will just need to hold and occupy Gaza, because the Hamas did not allow us or give us any other option.
But there is something about this whole Palestinian refugee story. Of course, all of this refugee status, I don't even want to go in there because there's been like 4 generations of refugees still counted as refugees and all of that. But again, Syrian civil war produced millions of refugees, and everybody was able to receive them. Jordan had no problem receiving, what was it, 1 million refugees in Jordan. Why do they hate their own brothers? I mean, come on. And other countries, I mean, these people want to go and live in some normal surroundings. I mean, why punish them?
Look, you are asking here actually a question that deals with philosophy and theology, and this is really why such a small country, and broadly speaking, a small conflict. Broadly speaking, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is one of the smallest conflicts in the Middle East in terms of the number of people who died from it. There's still less than 20,000 Palestinians. Now perhaps the number is grown a little bit since in all the Israeli-Palestinian war. In 1 month in the Syrian war, we had 20,000 casualties. And we're talking now about 75 years of conflict in comparison. Even now, when you have another significant number of Palestinians, which will take it, let's say, to a larger tally of victims. Which, of course, every victim and every person who passed away as a result of war is a sad story. But we need to put all these things into a perspective. The Arab world, even in 1948, when you had 7 Arab countries, they didn't really send their best militaries to fight. They sent some of the gangs in order to have a symbolic gesture for the Palestinians. They have never tried to really take responsibility for the Palestinian file. And by the way, with some respect to the Palestinians and their story, and I think we need to recognize this, as they need to recognize us, but we have to understand, of course, the Palestinians are here, and they were here for a while, and they're here from many places. We have Palestinians here in Abu Ghosh, who came actually from Chechnya by the Ottomans. We have Palestinians in Jisr Azarqa, who used to be Bosnians. We have Palestinians who were used to be Sudanese or Egyptians. And they were amalgamated into Palestinian polity, and now they call themselves all Palestinians, and I think we can accept this. But part of this acceptance is when they will accept the basic right of the Jewish people to have their own country and be their neighbors.
And they have not done it.
And now the Arab world is beginning to accept this, which gets these Palestinians and the Iranian allies a bit more irritated, because now we have the Abraham Accords and even the Saudis are saying we are willing to recognize Israel. And I said, okay, that may be the last chance for us to really try to really create a conflict. We need to overcome this, because it's important that our Arab colleagues in the world, some of them may even become our friends, will accept the right of Israel to be here. And at some point that hopefully will force even the Palestinians to accept our right to be here in the Middle East. This is really part of what it's all about. I think when we accept that point, when we can accept and recognize each other, we might be able to begin to formulate a better future for all of us.
Nir, thank you so much for bringing so many constructive ideas on the table. I really loved the analysis, and I really enjoyed talking to you today. And our friends, this is the very reason we are here. We are here to give answers for our allies. And don't forget to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Those who pray for the peace of Jerusalem will prosper. And so tune in next week, every day, 1 o'clock Jerusalem time, And we are here together with you. Pray for the peace of Israel. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem and stand with us, because together we will win.